Okay, so the next panel that we want to add some thickness to will be this saddle panel right here, right there. So again, let's make sure everything we're not working with is turned off. Now I'm going to leave the inner shell on here so I can see it as a reference. But I'm going to go into my options panel, and I'm going to go to inactive meshes, and I'm going to, we'll just make it a default, but I want to turn off the wireframe on it just so that reduces the visual clutter here. There we go. Now you can see that the saddle has kind of sunken into the inner shell in certain areas, but I'm not really worried about that right now. I do want to, however, make some modifications to this area up here and possibly the sides here to accommodate the stitching. But I also need to accommodate these eyelets because those are going to be modeled into the actual piece. So I want to do that before I do anything on the as far as thickening goes. Now, because it's a little bit difficult for me to see through the inner shell to the saddle part that it's kind of fallen below the surface, there's a couple of things we could do to remedy that. One is I can go to the shading mode here, shading tab, hit the base material and go down to where it says material trans. Where it says transparent amount, just adjust that upwards, actually move that number up till you actually can see through it. All right. That makes everything a little bit light, and certainly it's one possibility. Let me turn that back down to 0 again. Or I can just go to my polygons here, and I can do a push using the deform tools where it says push here. And I'm going to push this outwards, and let's see, pull that out. There we go. I'm just going to push it out a little bit for right now. And that way I can actually see my model a lot better. So I'm just going to use this method, and if at any time I need to see through my panel to the graphics below, I can simply just go up here to a wireframe, and then I can see what's going on with the model. I'm going to go around and tweak this model a little bit, just kind of line up the top parts a little bit better, and I'm going to use the element move tool to do that. And I'm going to jump around both sides here and see if I can get a little bit better fit on that side panel. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. So I think I'm going to be fine with that. So we need to create some eyelets in the saddle area there. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to move some edges around on there to accommodate for those eyelets. And my goal here is to try to create square polygons, or at least as square as possible, where the eyelets are going to be located. So I'm going to move some edges out of the way, so that'll create some open space there. And I'll just speed through this so you can watch my process here. And please note that through this entire process, I'm making extensive use of the edge slide tool. And of course, I'll be adding additional edges where I feel there needs to be more geometry. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create the polygons that are going to be the cutouts for the eyelets. And I'll use the bevel tool, hit the B key, and I'll bring up the tool properties there, and we'll uncheck the group polygons and just set the segments to 1. All right, and then I can adjust the size by using the red handle to give me a size. But so I'm going to go over to the deform toolbox and click on the radial tool, and then click in a viewport to activate that. And you'll notice it made perfectly square polygons out of those selected polygons. And a perfectly square polygon will create a perfectly round hole when converted to Catmull-Clark's. And we'll just do the same thing to the other side, using the bevel tool. And of course, click on the radial tool to make those perfectly square. Now they might not be exactly the same size, so you can click on them individually and use that little handle to scale the size of the polygons. Now the next step is to delete those polygons and convert it to a Catmull-Clark, and you can see that it made perfectly round holes that will serve as our eyelets. Now before I thicken this panel, I noticed that there is a little bit of an issue here with some polygons right there in that upper corner, and they're a little bit out of alignment in my opinion, and I want them to be a little flatter before we do any kind of bevel or extrusion on this object. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to select one of the polygons to act as a work plane, and that clicking the work plane in the upper right corner there, or the upper part of the screen, aligns the work plane to that polygon. Now I'm going to select the polygons that I want to align and straighten out, and just use the scaling tool, but make sure negative scale is not checked. And using the green handle, I'm just going to drag that all the way until it stops. And that should flatten out all those selected polygons on the same plane. And that's going to make for a much better bevel operation for me. And just a quick reminder to deselect the work plane option when you are done doing the flattening operation. Now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and thicken this saddle panel. And it might seem a little counterintuitive, but what I want to do is actually use the push tool to shrink this down so it fits in between the walls of the inner shell. And now I'll go ahead and fire off the bevel command while we are in polygon mode, and bring up the tool properties, make sure group polygons is on, and set segments to 2. And just grab the blue handle and pull that out. And yeah, so that pulls out very nicely. You might have to go in and make a few tweaks to some of the edges and some of the geometry to make sure it sits well on the surface of the inner shell. And as a side note, you want to make sure that you have thickened polygons deselected, because you do not need those interior polygons. No one will ever see those. And that should be it for the thickening of the saddle, and we'll just go ahead and move on with the other panels.